Thanks, Mark. So, who of you is not able to program JavaScript or does not program JavaScript on a day-to-day basis? Sorry for you guys. I have some slides with pictures, though. Okay, I think the topic of the conference here is to go beyond, to push the limits. And I think this is really what we do today, right? We use the technology we have at our hands, and I mean this literally. We have great power here to push things forward. And did you know that each single smartphone we have in our pockets has more computational power than NASA had when they put a man on the moon? Well, NASA put a man on the moon, and we put birds into pigs with that power, yes. Mobile is really great fun, right? But we can do serious business as well. And developing sometimes is fun, sometimes isn't. And many of you might have heard of these Xcode and Objective-C, and others try to avoid Java or C# to program. I tell you what, we can leverage web technology to build mobile apps, really great mobile apps. And that is not limited to websites. It's something more we can accomplish on mobile platforms. Well, HTML in particular had evolved over the last years, and this great brand, HTML5, were great for us to communicate what can be done with web technology. Has anybody not seen WebGL live? I mean, not Christian's demo this morning, but real 3D stuff? Everybody has seen this, or does somebody not seen that demo here? Okay, well, I will show you. It's not mobile, but it's WebGL, and will tell you what's doable in a browser today. That is not a beta, that is just Chrome, and it runs on other browsers as well. So what you see here is a true 3D scene with fraction, with physics, and with reflections. And you can turn on in that demo here, gravity, to make it really shine. And that is today's web technology with hardware accelerated graphics. Wow, yeah. Well, yes, that's doable on a desktop. On tablets, we had some great projects recently. That one here is a German company, put out a web magazine that's purely written in web technology and runs on a tablet, specifically on an iPad only. But nevertheless, it has slideshows, multi-touch gestures, movies, all these transitions. And all you have to do is go to a URL, put a bookmark on your home screen, and that's it. That's pure web technology. So, yeah, why am I so excited about that? And why are you guys doing web anyway? I mean, what's so great about the web? The core idea here is you have a sophisticated and meanwhile mature stack of technology that runs almost everywhere. That's the core idea. But in practice, as we've seen, for example, Aaron told us how to overcome all the different quirks, the reality is somewhat different. And I tell you what, the user doesn't care at all. I mean, it's a bit disappointing that the user doesn't care that it's really JavaScript or HTML. What the user thinks is he or she wants a great user experience through a mobile, the right content with the right presentation proper for that device, no matter what kind of technology is beneath. And with that, some expectations come. People have been told how to use modern smartphones, and that's with a finger, that's with gestures. They assume that the device is capable of doing great things, such as using the geolocation, the camera, the accelerometer. It can play sounds, vibrate, access the context details, make a change in the calendar by receiving a mail. And the problem here is people think in terms of apps. So I have the impression that people buy a phone, and before they leave home, they already got, what kind of apps should I install? What kind of apps? And it's these little tiny icons the user thinks about, not web URLs. And if we think how we can leverage our knowledge of web technology to get that experience, we are currently stuck. since web technology on mobile phones doesn't allow us to access the phone on every device. You can access the accelerometer on some devices, yes, but you cannot access the calendar, nor the contact details. And every smartphone has some twists you have to think about when you develop mobile pages on a mobile device. So let's go a step back. A year ago, that was the landscape of mobile platforms out there. Not thinking about web now, but platforms. Well, things changed over time. Strategic goals, some companies were acquired, so a few were left. And then we had bad press of some companies, maybe server outages for several days, or some criminal activities empowered by their network, and they literally got burned by the press. And I would say we now have two major platforms out there, and a third one with a big question mark. And that is Android. Most devices sold out there are Androids, smartphones. And we have iOS with these gorgeous iPhones. And Windows Phone is catching up with some new headsets produced by Nokia. And they are somewhere in between. They are more open than iOS is. And Cell have curated app stores. They have great tools, as Sasha told me yesterday again. The tools are really great. Yes, he's right. And, well, I think these are the major platforms you have to address when you want to build apps. Okay. But what about this web thing now? Web apps. So what I want to do here is I want to talk about what's doable with pure web technology. And I will really rush over that since only few of you have never programmed JavaScript, and this is not how you build websites that are conform to mobile browsers. I will then talk to you how you can nevertheless use that knowledge to produce real apps and access all the capabilities of the device, contacts, for example. And after that, we will continuously eliminate what's still missing to get a great experience. So, web applications. And you will hear at this conference again and again about the technical possibilities to address different needs for different phones. And you can use, for example, CSS3 is amazing for animations. Or you have media queries to address the different formats of the device, since I think Samsung has more than 100 different Android devices. And even with web technology, with plain vanilla websites, you can access some of the functionality available on the phones. For example, you can use a URL to start an SMS, and to start YouTube as an app, as a movie player, or start a phone call. And that's pretty neat, and things are evolving over time. I think maybe a year from now, we will have access to cameras maybe on every phone, not on a selection of phones. That is the common web architecture as we had it years ago. So we have a dumb display thing called browser on the left-hand side, and we have a web server on the right-hand side. And that server knows all the logic. And with mobile websites in the former days, we built something like a bridge, switches or mobile portals that scan the user agent of a web page to deliver the right content. Things shifted over time, and now we have really capable HTML5 web browsers on the device, and we can use the opposite paradigm, where most of the logic, assets, media, and logic is really on the client, with offline capabilities and so forth. So the reality is somewhere in between. You still have some backend to feed new data, but applications today can use all these HTML5 technology. You can do this right from the ground, or you can leverage frameworks. The most prominent out there, or those, I picked those since there are two categories of frameworks, are jQuery and TensorTouch. There's jQuery Mobile, there's Joe, there are plenty of others, but they all fall into one of these two categories, where you have either, on the left-hand side, a declarative way of injecting mobile experience, or a programmatic approach on the right-hand side. Don't get me wrong. It looks like the right one is really obfuscated or hard to do. You mix up data, logic, and layout on the right-hand side, whereas on the left-hand side you have plain vanilla HTML. These frameworks are able to give you an experience that is really mobile for data-driven applications. And there are also game engines out there, but games on mobile are not as performant as you would expect this. Okay. Don't get shocked. It's just to wrap things up here. With mobile websites, what you got at the moment is you have websites that run literally on any device. Somehow you can manage it that they run really on each device, but you cannot access all the hardware, nor can you distribute your app through the App Store. And those two negative points are really driving people to try out something else. Okay, that was how we can do mobile web without any code, without any samples, just to get it done. Now, how can we access then the different hardware features we have on the device? And the idea here is to pick a slightly different architecture. We still have a browser here, and that browser has HTML. That browser has JavaScript and executes and renders as the ordinary browser. But it's not the system's default browser. Instead, you wrap a browser inside your own application. And with a pretty neat technique called request interception, you somehow mangle in your own logic, and you can communicate with the outer scope, and that is your own application. I want to demo that. Does anybody know Phonegap out there? Does anybody know how Phonegap works? I mean, how it really works that you can invoke with JavaScript hardware functionality. Okay. So what I just told you about frameworks applies to hybrid apps as well. There are some frameworks out there. The most prominent here is Phonegap. And what it does is it allows you to write HTML again. Here I have HTML. And to run this as a mobile application in a full-screen web browser. So here's your app. You click here, and it opens another web page as we expect this. The idea is now that we don't solely rely on web technology, but to invoke certain natively written code in your host application. And that's been done by looking into the browser's component. So, is it really? Reveal this in the group tree. So what I have here is a piece of code that holds the browser. And each time you click on a specific link, what you can do is you can, for example, log what the request would look like. So a request comes in, and you can log this. I can scroll this up. You can read it then in the back. So I'm opening a log here and rerunning this. And voila, the first request we got is just opening the local file that's packaged within the application. And now if I click this, I got another request. Please open http google.com. And now I will intercept this. I say if the user clicked navigation. If the user clicked on that specific link clicked, then please do nothing and return immediately. So let's prove that shortly, quickly. So I click here, nothing happens, right. The magic now is that you say, well, I have some piece of JavaScript here, say it's 2 + 2, and I have a piece of result, and that result comes from the web view we are currently looking at. So please evaluate that JavaScript, I'm telling the browser, and then I'm logging the result again. clicking here, and it crashes. So that one here is not a C, objective C string. So what you can see here is that we got a 4. Right. That's not that impressive. Well, I could have calculated that myself. But what we can make is we can make a slightly more complex JavaScript here. We can say, for example, the JavaScript that's going to be evaluated is document body plus equals headline of level 2, hello world. Now that JavaScript is going to be executed within the context of the document body. Pardon? Inner HTML, right. So many. You know, if you know JavaScript, you can instantly do that. So if you now click that link, it modifies the document in the context of the web browser. And I think you will trust me that you can invoke other JavaScript functions as well. And that's particularly the way how the website can tell me to do something in the native environment. And I can talk back then to the web browser after I've finished what I've been asked for. So a practical implication is that you say, I have here a cryptic URL that tells you something. And in fact, it just requires you, the native host, to look into a queue of commands. You pass that command then and open, for example, the camera. And once the camera had been shot a photo, you pass back a URI encoded image into your web page. And that's the basic idea how you can do then, can access native functionality. Okay. So I already mentioned Phonegap. The cool thing about Phonegap is not that it's been acquired by Adobe recently, but that there are many different platforms out there they support. And most recently, the Windows Phone came also. So you have iOS, Android, and Windows Phone now available on Phonegap, and that's really good news. With frameworks like Sencha or jQuery Mobile or you name it, you program your HTML page, and at all these certain points where you need native access, you just invoke a JavaScript function to do that. And here, for example, is from Logitech a remote control for the squeeze box. That one here is a more boring, but it's one of the few that addresses BlackBerry on the right-hand side. Apps that run and are distributed via the App Store, marketplaces, and so forth. The problem here is, I mean, how do you develop websites for different screens or mobile devices? You fire up your desktop browser, develop your page there, and use graceful integration to make it and media queries to get it down to other browsers here. And you can debug and test it on your desktop browser. As soon as you use another API that's not available on your desktop, for example, please take a picture, it's not doable anymore. And we're looking for something that's called remote debugging, so we can debug something that's running on your phone. Opera has something like this, and indeed you can remote debug on your mobile. The problem is Android and iOS run a WebKit, and Windows Phone runs an IE. So no point for us here, but there's something else. Who of you knows Winer or Winery? Okay, that edge over here. Let me show you a short application, a few liner that uses Phonegap actually. So I'm opening that. It's slightly more complex. It iterates over all the installed contacts on your phone and displays the name. So all we have to do is look into the HTML. The HTML is really, again, just a headline, and you can click the headline to do a search. If you go into the search, it configures, and that one here is actually Phonegap. You configure search configurations and invoke a find method that then succeeds or has an error, and there are built here really purely HTML. Never, ever do that at home. This name here comes directly from the address book. You could inject JavaScript here and do whatever you want. OK, so I'm running this. OK, click here. And 2 contacts in the contact list. Well, I already made it right. Let's look in the documentation here. If you look in the documentation of Phonegap, you see that there's something like my contact display name to access the address book. If I do that and run my application, you will see that I got nulls. And the reason is, if you carefully look somewhere, even with frameworks like Phonegap, you got platform-specific quirks you have to get around. And the quirk here is, well, the attribute display name is not filled properly. But how could we ever find this out? And the idea is that you fire up something like Winer. Winer technically is a web server that runs locally here now on my machine. And it not only does what we will see in a minute, but it also delivers some JavaScript. I will inject that JavaScript into my page here. So it's here, no. Here. If I now rerun the application, it connects to that web server here. Winer already recognized that. And what you got here is a WebKit inspector. So you can now introspect the document here on the right-hand side. You can even change the DOM. Sorry for that. And you can introspect the console. You cannot stepwise debug JavaScript, but at least you can see the console. So normally there would be log messages here. But what I'm doing is I'm logging now each contact here. And if I go to Winer, I see I do have a log statement of the 2 contacts I had in the address book here. And I see that display name is null. Instead, name.formatted would be right. And I can actually introspect what's running on the phone. And that is not limited to the formatted. That's not limited to the emulator. You can attach any remote browser that runs WebKit to Winer. So you can run that on your phone as well. To prove actually that it runs well on the other phones, I want to go to that camera here, here. What you can see on the right-hand side is the Windows Phone I do have here. And I deployed the same application here, and if I click on the contacts, it really runs, displays the contacts I have here on my phone. So that is then Phonegap on the Windows Phone. Let's go back to the frameworks we have out there. Say jQuery Mobile. jQuery Mobile claims to run on a Windows Phone. And I'm accessing a jQuery Mobile test site that's online. So it takes a while to load. The problem you will see is that the Windows Phone interaction metaphor with all these tiles and transitions between the different screens are not emulated by the website that's not going to be loading here. So that's always the problem with live demos. OK, I'm skipping that. You might have seen the nice transitions here. And if I go, for example, to if I go, for example, to people, that's kind of my address book. That looks kind of different on the Windows Phone. whereas the typical web frameworks will deliver a experience that's really just with a back button on the top left, like the navigation metaphors on the iOS. Pages like that really you got the impression of a website, but not of a native app. So that's the major problem here, I think. All right. So with Phonegap, there comes something different. Even if you have a framework like Phonegap that allows you to deploy code on your phone, on your emulator, on the various platforms, you have the problem that you have to build and compile the actual binary that's going to be distributed. And Phonegap took the next logical step here and provides something that builds an app in the cloud. So you end up uploading a single zip file with all your HTML, JavaScript, and assets. And the cloud building tool will do all the compiling for you. And in the end, you just download the binaries. I think I cannot access the page right now. Phonegap is very vital if it comes to the community. You have plenty of open source developers out there concentrating on Phonegap. You have lots of plugins, and these little plugins are really the door to the native features you have on your phone. So there are, for example, plugins to receive remote push notifications, plugins to scan barcodes, and even plugins to display a 3D canvas, an OpenGL canvas, so you can program in JavaScript and render on an OpenGL surface. The remaining problem of Phonegap is that it uses the browser as a rendering surface. So for large lists, if you scroll deep down to a long list, you got blocking effects. It's not hardware accelerated 3D graphics at the moment on the phones. And still, since it's all inside a browser, you cannot, for example, overlay a camera picture with some other widgets. Those are not being able to display inside a browser, hence not being able to display on Phonegap. But what you get is real a boost of productivity, since you can keep with or stay with all your tools to develop HTML, and you got monetization via the marketplaces, app stores, app worlds, by just keeping to your roots, staying to your roots. Okay, another group of applications you can have out there are these so-called interpreted apps. The idea here is it's quite similar to what you have in the browser. You have an application script and files and all that on your client, but instead of rendering then HTML and using CSS, you ask, similar to what Phonegap does, your host environment to do it for you. So if you're looking for, say, a table of cells, of different rows, you're not going to write a list, an unordered list in HTML, but you ask via an API the interpreter to do it on your behalf. The most prominent framework out there that's doing that is Appcelerator. And Appcelerator has a very famous app out there that's called Wunderlist. Anybody of you has used Wunderlist before? Okay, quite a few. They got millions of downloads of that particular app. For those of you who haven't seen this before, and in a direct comparison to how, oh, that's blinking here, to how this looks compared to Phonegap apps, I'm having here a similar app called My Diary. And My Diary uses some sort of web framework that allows you to produce a web-enabled website here. And you see here, it's not completely full size. If you go to the Events tab, for example, or is it the journal, go back, you have a back button on the top left, even though on Android you would use the blinking button over here to go back. And it's more like putting an iPhone UI on an Android. And I think that's the major drawback of all these existing web frameworks that will give you easily the impression of a mobile website or real app, that they mimic the iOS UI. Now, if you look at the UI of Wunderlist, That's Wunderlist here. It runs smoother, even though you cannot see it here. And if you drill down to a details page, it really uses the native UI widgets. The back button brings you back then, as you would expect it on the particular platform. And that really allows us to first use the native widgets, get real good scrolling performance, while staying with JavaScript. And I will show you how this looks in code. So in the background, I will fire up the Android emulator. That might take a while. And in the foreground, I'm running the same application on iOS. So that's a demo application called Kitchen Sink here. It demos all the different aspects of that application. And you have native UI, scrolling behavior. And now I'm drilling down to a particular view. It's table views, and then we have table API basics. And now what's that? Titanium Accelerator recently acquired Aptana. Aptana is an Eclipse-based web development plugin for Eclipse. And on top of that, they now implemented real JavaScript debugging and introspection. So I clicked here on the table view, and I've been brought here to the debugger of Aptana. I can see how the table view is being constructed on that view. It says, please take a table view, create a table view with that data here. And the data is just an array that consists of table view rows being configured with JSON-notated objects. So it's really just JavaScript. And I can look into the values of variables. So the data here, for example, is empty. And if I step over, say, 2 lines, I can see that the data now consists of 2 elements, and I can introspect their values. I can continue that application. It brings me then to the screen. And I put another breakpoint here in the callback handler of a particular, for that table view. So I get information about the cell that's been clicked. And again, you got here the inspector, and you can look into the event. You see the index and coordinates, mouse coordinates, and can do whatever you want here, as with any real programming environment. And the clue here is you use JavaScript and to some degree CSS to program your application, but it really feels, behaves, and looks native. And as a comparison here, telnet, connecting via telnet to that emulator. Okay. As a comparison, that one here is the very same application. I'm going to the table view. Et voila. So that one really looks like Android, where on the left-hand side you see typical iOS widgets. So you get real native UI. And of course, they come with plugins to enable you to use more native capabilities. You can access camera, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and all you can think of. But there's also a vivid market, so you can, if you ever come up with an own module, you can market that over there as well. Well, Accelerator is it's really cool, I think. You can program JavaScript, you have debugging facilities, and it's real native experience. But for rich media, that is movies and images, it's really hard, since animations are not that easy to program. And the problem is it's not running on the Windows Phone, and since it still relies on interpreted JavaScript, don't trust anyone who says it's cross-compiled. It's really JavaScript interpreted. You cannot do games on that, since you barely come over 60 invocations of your JavaScript per second. So there's another category. generated apps. The idea is quite similar. You just write your code in some scripting language, here JavaScript, have your files over there, and instead of wrapping a container around that, you push a magic button, and what comes out is truly native code that's been executed as fast as any other native application. Sounds too good to be true. There are some projects out there. Again, the middle one, most promising, was recently acquired by Accelerator. And the other one are more, well, the right one uses a domain-specific language. The left one is more academic. What remains is Unity 3D. Anyone heard of Unity 3D? Wow, that's a lot. Who of you used Unity for mobile development? Okay, yeah, that's only 2. Yeah, it's a commercial tool. It's really sophisticated, and it's way more than a library or a framework. It's a real tool chain, but most of you know anyway. Okay, so if so many of you already had used that, you most likely are familiar with Angry Bots. That's their demo application running. I need the sound, right? That's shipping with Unity. But first, Unity, again, is really a tool where you have a scene editor, asset management, version control, collaboration, and integration to other 3D authoring systems. And you can test your application directly in your IDE. Here it's a shooting game. And again, this is really, where's my mouse? This is really the live scene we are talking about here. With children. So you can change the scene right while you are programming this and test out all that's running. So yes, most of you, well, some of you might know that it's under the hood using .NET technology. So on the mobile, it boils down to Mono, whereas the Mono compiler uses jitting and some pre-compilation to do native code. But you can use JavaScript as well, JavaScript for all the logic in your project. And that JavaScript is then been translated to your .NET code and so on and so forth. So if I now run play here and attach that editor to the running game and shoot over here, it stops and brings me to the debugger. And from here, I can really introspect what the current value of the variables are, change them, and so forth. That's pretty neat. Okay, continue here. Okay, stop here. And what I'm doing right now is I'm changing the code. So you might have seen the fire here. I will deactivate this just to prove that it's really the code we are talking about. I rerun the game. And now, if I'm shooting, it's really not there. So yeah, really I'm programming JavaScript here. And to give you an impression how this looks on your mobile, I do have the very same application here on my mobile. So where's the camera again? It's here. So that's an ordinary iPhone. As with any iPhone, plenty of apps. Sticking in the audio jack. Unity currently compiles to, oh yeah. That's pretty dark, but I think you can guess how it would look like in the end. So it's really the same game, the same scene, and yeah, you can play the same game then on your mobile. Of course, you have to address the same problems you have on the other platforms, respectively, different screen sizes and so forth. Okay, so much about Unity 3D. You can do serious stuff with that as well, not only games. There's a company in Cologne, for example, that does exhibition and fair systems. Normally would have been done with Flash, for example, but it had to be delivered on the iPad, and they chose Unity 3D. And yes, it's really performant for any sort of 3D visualization. So it's hardware-accelerated 3D. All this collision detection, all that has been handled on a native way, and you just have a JavaScript API to program against. You got a really wealthy community around it, but you have to learn it, and it's not your mom's and father's JavaScript. It's really an API you have to learn. And the problem is doing real normal apps here, that is drill down lists, keyboard input, and so forth, is not what it's intended to be used for. So in order to do that, you have to apply hacks here. That means if you want to do mobile application with JavaScript, you have to choose between different alternatives. And that is, yes, you can do web with all its advantages, and that is availability, but disadvantages like availability of features. Yes, you can use Phonegap, but on top of the problem that is still a browser with all its implication, there's barely tooling for developing. Accelerator is great if you just want to do lists drill down and attach some sort of hardware, but it lacks if you want to do multimedia impressions. And generated apps, specifically Unity 3D, have a certain purpose. They are specializing in a particular domain, and here, Unity 3D, that's games. So if you want to do the ordinary RSS reader combined with some movies, Unity, again, is not your choice. I'd be more than happy to talk about the different alternatives. I'll be there at the bar, and we can chat later about that.